All right, this is the Melonhead teacher coming at you, and I'm going to be giving you some Ohio 8th grade history, but this is also Ohio 5th grade history. As I remember, the curriculum in the 5th grade has to do with Beringia, as I used to teach 5th grade for several years, and I teach 8th grade now. So, interesting point that they both have to do at the beginning with early Americas. Now, I know in the 5th grade they go into the people living in the Americas a lot more than what we're going to go into it in 8th grade, but this is a little bit of a review. Terms that you need to know. Make sure you write down these words and give a little space afterward. Now, in my class, you should have a composition book, and you will write these words down, put a dash beside it, and leave a line or two. If you write really big, you might want to leave 3 lines. So don't forget to write these down. If you need to pause this video, please do so, and that way you can get all of these words and not be feeling like you're rushed. Archaeology is your first word. So, this is the study of ancient people. I remember how to spell archaeology by, in the middle of it, it's got 3 vowels, and these 3 vowels are in alphabetical order. So, if that was ever giving you a hard time, like which letter to put first, that's how you do it. Make sure you put it in alphabetical order. That's just a little tip that I have for you because I am not the best speller. So that's how I remember how to spell archaeology, the study of ancient people. Let's look at that section of the word ology for a second. You think of the word or the section of the word ology, does it bring any kind of words to your mind? Okay, you might be thinking in the high school level, you are going to have to take a class called biology. If you are thinking maybe sociology, that's kind of some of the things that I was thinking. You might have other words that I'm not thinking of. But anyway, ology, if you break that down and you think about it, it is the study of something. So if you can remember ology, you may be able to figure out what other words mean when you encounter them just by knowing this chunk of the meaning of the words. Next vocabulary word is artifact. These are tools or items that are left behind, made, created by people of ancient times. You'll find arrowheads in areas where Native Americans lived, and spear points and things like that. Sometimes people are lucky enough to find those things. Pottery and other artistic expressions out like jewelry and things like that. And an example here is a mosaic that is created by an ancient bunch of people. When I think of the word artifact, I take the chunk of the word art and I remember art is made by people like paintings and sculptures and stuff like that. So that human aspect, I want to remember that. And that's the way I remember the word, the definition, or at least part of the definition of the word artifact. Ice Age. During the Ice Age, this is a very long time, thousands of years, where the land in the world was very cold for extremely long periods of time, extremely cold temperatures. And during this time, the water cycle was taking place, just as you have learned in the 7th grade and probably the 4th, that water evaporates and goes up into the clouds, and then it gets really heavy. When it gets so much water in it, it drops down. Well, the reason why these massive sheets of ice were on top of the land was because every time it would precipitate, the water was left behind and it would not melt and go back into the sea. So You had sea levels dropping, the salinity rate or the salt water, the saltiness of the sea was getting higher, and the sea level was going lower. Well, areas that were close to sea level were being exposed now. And one of the places that it was being exposed is this place in the it's the Bering Strait. And then this gives you an example of how close Russia is to the United States. So all there is this little bit of water right here. Now, during the Ice Age, if you look at the orange levels, these orange areas they're saying were exposed and out to where people could travel from Asia into North America by way of this land bridge called Beringia. All right, so that's a theory. The the people in this time, they were nomadic. They were in search of hunting grounds. They went from place to place. They had no settlements that were just permanent. So they would go from place to place. What they would do is they would see an area, they would deplete it of its resources, like foods like mussels, clams, nuts, berries, all the wild game they could get out of the area, and then they would have to move on to another place to do the same thing. Eventually, by eating grains and kind of dealing with these different foods, eventually people start noticing, and this could have happened as easy as maybe they threw something in the trash like grains, like a kernel of corn, and it eventually sprouted, and they realized, wow, that is a corn plant that I just ate and threw the extra kernels out there. So anyway, it could have just been as easy as that kind of an accident. So anyway, we're getting into agriculture now. Carbon dating is the scientific method that they use to see how old things are. And they use carbon dating to see how long ago people lived in the Americas, and they have found pretty old artifacts. Another one of your vocabulary words, nomad, and you can see in this picture that they are going to a high point trying to find a new place to go in search of food. So the migration patterns of people are, this is examples here. There are different theories that at one time they came across the land bridge Beringia into North and South America. There are theories that these coastal people, they lived on the side of, and they just came down. They lived in, canoes and eventually ended up there. Both are very good theories. Possible either one would have worked. There was this passage that opened up whenever they came across in the land bridge, and then when it melted, the passage opened up, and then these people came down. That's another theory. So, migration, a movement of a large number of people in a new homeland. People were moving, they were following food, and these big woolly mammoths were running out of food, so they had to keep traveling south in order to get areas to where they could survive. Eventually, they ran out of food and were not able to sustain their organisms themselves, so they ended up becoming extinct, which could have been due to overhunting. And eventually, there were no more big animals like this to hunt. So, luckily, some of the people found out that when you plant a seed, it will grow into that, and it actually happened across the whole world at the same time. People were realizing that they could plant seeds and they would grow. So, the steady food supply meant no longer having to go from place to place. Their food was right there. And you can see here maize is it's an early form of corn grown by the Native Americans. Look what maize looked like in 17,000 BC. And then now. So that was like 9,000 years ago what corn looked like and genetically modified into this. That just means that you plant the best kernels of the best ones and you don't plant the weak looking stuff. So, genetically modified, that's what that is. And they planted pumpkins and beans and gourds. And they were happy that they were able to have an abundance of food, so their population grew. And the surplus of food meant that civilizations could stay in one place. Now, that does not mean that every civilization decided that they were going to just stay put. We did have some nomadic tribes in early 1400s, even late 1400s. You had tribes that were nomadic, seasonally nomadic. Early communities, you can see that you've got some that farmed like this. They were lucky enough to have an abundance of food by farming, and they would start to adapt a similar culture based on their environment, how much they could um, get out of their environment. So the food that they ate, the lifestyle that they lived, all these things were based on the environment in which they lived. So they were able to start talking, and they started coming up with beliefs on how they came to be, and different, just like we do. We just wonder about things and how we um, got here and all these things. So they did the same thing, and their cultures were similar because they would talk amongst themselves and agree and disagree and come up with a conclusion. Like I said before, some civilizations, they still decided to be nomadic. They might have hunted and fished instead of farming. But you see a lot more trading going on with these people of different lifestyles, the Native American lifestyles, different trading. The abundance harvest created complex buildings because they were able to sit and think a lot more. They had an abundance of food. They were able to kind of relax at times and think about things and make things that were more complex. Artistic expression, like their jewelry, their sculptures, their little monuments, and things like that were getting more and more um, complex. Communities had similar customs. And that leads us to culture. Culture is a way of life of a group of people who share similar beliefs and customs. Now, I share with you two pictures of people that have a very different lifestyles, very different cultures. This is an example of how environment does affect, the way you live and your daily life. You can see that these people living in the colder environment with a bear, they're going to have things in place to protect them from things like bears. And they are going to be dressed in different kinds of clothing, um, things like that. And then you have these people that are probably farmers. Looks like they're in a hotter environment, so they're not going to be wearing a lot of clothes. And that just is an example of how environment affects the cultures where we live. But people are still people no matter where they live. Anyway, we come to the end of this, and now is time for you to make sure you do not miss out on another video by subscribing to my channel and click the like button. Also, if you don't mind, in the comment sections, uh, put down how did the lifestyle change due to the development of agriculture. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.